Good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network's BRN Sunday podcast. I'm Jeff Snyder, your host for the next 60 minutes as members of the media, academia, and financial services go around the globe to discuss the issues related to retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more. We've got another great show for you this week, and we actually have a special guest. This week we're going to be joined by Stacy B. Sandler. She's a principal with Deloitte Consulting. Deloitte produces a biannual defined contribution retirement survey. You're going to love to hear the results of that survey. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode, the last one for the year of BRN Sunday. Let's kick things off on the program with a look at the latest tech news. And joining me on the line, Senior Technology Consumer Products Reporter from the Motley Fool. He is Daniel Klein. Hi, Dan. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
It's great to hear your voice. Great to talk with you. So what's top of mind for you this week?
Well, I think we have some of the biggest news we've had in a while.
Oh, really?
Disney has made a major announcement. There are going to be Baby Yoda, or the child, if you prefer, plush toys available for pre-order that you will get somewhere after March. So the long wait is almost over.
So we should expect Disney stock to go through the roof now, because I got to tell you, we're recording this on a Friday before the Sunday that we release it. I did watch The Mandalorian episode 8, and I got to tell you, I'm not going to spoil it for anyone, but I love Baby Yoda. I mean, or the child, because it's not really Yoda, but it's completely adorable. And I think it's kind of like missing the boat a little bit. I can't believe they didn't plan that out better, but maybe they did.
Well, it was actually intentional. Jon Favreau, who created and directed some of The Mandalorian, actually worked with Disney to specifically avoid having toys. And the reason for that is while you can keep the toys off the shelf, they still end up getting shown to people in the industry. They have to be sold to the Walmarts and the Targets. And the reveal of the child, Baby Yoda, was the big hook of the first episode of The Mandalorian.
Yeah.
So if you have that toy out there, and this has been a problem with some of the Avengers movies, that you'll see toys for bad guys that they haven't exactly told you are in the movie. So, I've read a lot of stories, and it actually said Disney lost, I want to say, $2.7 million by not having the toy. And Disney losing $2.7 million is like you and I dropping a quarter.
Yeah.
Like it's just not that relevant.
I got to tell you, I mean, that reveal in that first episode of the child, of this creature, really made The Mandalorian for me. I mean, I think you had obviously I love the character, The Mandalorian, and not to go into too much detail to spoil it for the audience, but I mean, I just think that character is really cute, and it dovetails nicely, bringing in probably younger viewers to the Star Wars universe. So really well done by Disney. And I also have to say that Baby Yoda kind of looks like my cat Peaches, or my wife and my cat Peaches, with the ears. Very cute. I'll post a picture. Peaches is very beautiful, but amazing.
I haven't seen the 8th episode. I'll watch it tonight.
Yeah.
And of course, there's a lot of speculation because we're not sure if this is a species, if Yoda is singular and this is perhaps a clone. There's some cloning in the new Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of reveal yet to come. I'm hoping some of it's in episode 8, but I'm not sure. But this touches on something bigger, kind of what's been our overriding theme for the year, which has been the changing face of cable television and streaming, and we're starting to see the other shoe drop. And what I mean by that is for a while we've had these live TV streaming services like Sling TV, like PlayStation Vue, which recently closed, Hulu Live, and those services were inexpensive ways to get a package of somewhere between 20 and 30 live channels. You'd get a bunch of sports. In the case of Sling, you could get ESPN if you wanted, TNT, really solid packages. And now you're seeing the price of those services is inching up. Sling announced a price increase this week. And the reason for that is these were kind of experiments, and now they're moving into full-fledged, successful services, and they have to pay their way. And as these cable channels are losing customers on the traditional cable channel side, they have to charge a little bit more money, and you're going to see everything a la carte, with the exception of Disney Plus and maybe in the short term Netflix. You're going to see a lot of price increases.
And I think it just makes sense. I mean, when you look at the business model, I think that it was like, let's convert people over. Clearly, it's much more adaptive. You can use it on your phone. You can use it on any device. And I think this is kind of the next reaction to that is that if you're going to give people the flexibility, these companies have to earn money. I mean, that's what their shareholders demand, right? Their stakeholders demand. They've got to earn money. And so what you've got to see price increases. Prices don't necessarily always go down. They go down when you have great scale. So to me, this doesn't look, just from the outside looking in, and Dan, you're the analyst here, this looks like it's pretty natural in the way markets evolve.
It is. It's kind of maybe you don't actually want what you think you wanted. And this is going to be fine for a person who's single, who only has to purchase the television they want.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want a very specific a la carte package and you're only serving your own needs, that's probably going to cost you less money than having to shell out $100+ for a traditional cable bundle. The problem is for those of us in families, and I have a wife and a teenager, and we all watch different things. So I don't have the option of just getting the packages I want with the channels that I like to watch. So for me, I may actually end up spending more money for less channels and for less content over the course of the next few years. Now, I'm not saying I watch 150 cable channels that I get. I probably watch like 6 of them. But there are going to be things that I might have occasionally watched, or when they had a special, or when I'm flipping around, I'm not going to have access to that stuff because the traditional bundle is dying. And you have to make these sort of decisions. Do I want Sling? Which package do I want? Do I want to have this, the one with ESPN, or do I want to go with the one that has a bunch of news channels? There's all sorts of choices to make, and that's going to involve sacrifice.
Dan, do we ever get to a place, and you bring up a great point, we've given people what they want, which is I want to pick what I want, you want to pick what you want, your wife wants to pick what she wants, your son wants to pick what he wants. Do we get to a point where we've expanded too much and that there is contraction, meaning not contraction in the marketplace, but people just say there's too much content, I can't consume all that, I don't want to be laden on the couch? You don't think so?
So there's going to be contraction in the marketplace. Like if you look right now, so I'm a big Food Network and Cooking Channel fan. And the Food Network is a mass market channel. It will probably survive, even if it had to go to a pure streaming. Would people pay $2 for it? They probably would as part of some sort of bundle. But the Cooking Channel, which is a very niche channel, survives because each cable customer pays a nickel or a dime or 20 cents or whatever the number is for that channel. And there's, half the cable universe is that type of very small thing where, hey, I'm paying 10 cents towards somebody who likes to watch MTV, and they're paying 10 cents towards me watching Cooking Channel. And when that sort of socialism goes away, we're all going to lose things we like because they're no longer going to be viable. And yes, you might see more streaming, like the Food Network is doing a lot of cooking classes and things like that. You could stream over the internet. But a lot of cable, maybe I would say as much as a third of cable, could go away.
Yeah, but that's the trend. I mean, I think cable is fighting for its life, so to speak. I mean, it's seen a huge, as we've reported on the network, and you've reported on the network, really, you've seen a departure of people from the traditional cable networks because that hasn't worked for them. So it just seems like that eventually will subside. People will go to all streaming. I mean, that is the future. These companies, these cable companies, have to adapt to that reality. And whether it happens this year or this coming year or next year, that remains to be seen. Sorry.
The problem has been the big channels. So ESPN, which for its family of channels costs somewhere between $9 and $12. So a pretty big piece of your cable bill goes to ESPN. And the people who say, well, I don't watch that, I want to opt out, I understand that. That's a pretty big amount of money. But if I said to you, hey, there's $10 in your cable bill that's supporting 65 different channels and keeping them on the air, and as we lose cable, those channels are going to be in a scramble to get carried on different streaming services to get those nickels and dimes, and some of them just aren't going to make it, and we're going to end up losing things we like, or maybe with something like the Golf Channel, that will become something that super golf fans pay $10 a month for, and you and I, who are more casual golf fans, I assume, don't get to watch the 2 or 3 times a year there's something dramatic or a documentary or something we want. So your programming in general is going to become much more specific to you and much more focused. And again, that's fine when I sit down at 10 o'clock tonight after my wife has gone to bed to watch The Mandalorian. It's not that great when it's 8:30 and we're flipping around and trying to find something everybody wants to watch.
Yeah, and I can tell you, my wife and I do not agree on anything on Netflix or Prime, and we try, but she thinks that my choices are actually abysmal, and so that we wind up not watching anything. But I wanted to go back to something, Dan, because you know, and we're close to the same age. I think I'm a little bit older than you are, but I've found myself disconnecting more, putting the phone down, actually picking up a book because some of the content, and maybe it's just me, and I want to get your opinion on this before we end the segment. I find some of the content on Netflix, on YouTube, just not up to par. It's just more of the same mishmash, not really thought out. Do you think that there's could be a resistance to some of that content that's being generated, and it turns into a surplus?
I think we're going to see more focused content. One thing I've really been talking about is I don't agree with the Netflix model. So if you're Netflix, if you have a new television show, you put out all 10, 12 episodes of it at once, it gets 3 days of media attention. And if it doesn't become an instant hit, it probably doesn't get a second season. Whereas you have Disney that launched The Mandalorian, and obviously it's a new Star Wars show. It's going to get a lot of hype. And then it's put out a new episode each week. So every week, each episode is dissected in the same way that, say, like The Walking Dead is, which is a traditional cable program, or any of the big shows on network television. So it gives it a chance to pick up an audience. And because of the streaming nature of it, if the first time you heard about this show was you and I talking about Baby Yoda, and you go, I want to see Baby Yoda, well, you can easily go back and watch all of it. Mm-hmm. And I think this sort of binge mode, release it all at once, or even kind of the network television model of, let's put a show out there, and if it doesn't get an audience in 3 weeks, it's going to go away. I think that's harmful, and we're going to start to see a little bit of a pullback of programming. And if something doesn't have a built-in audience like a new Star Wars or Marvel show, there's going to be more of a plan to promote it and sort of less just like throwing a lot of TV at the wall to see what sticks, because there are so many shows that I guarantee there's 3 shows I would love that I've never heard of.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of stuff people that have never heard of that they probably would like. It's just sifting through it is so challenging, and I just kind of throw my hands up. But that's just me. Well, Dan, I don't want to spoil. We're going to talk a little bit about 2020 tech trends when you appear on the network, so I don't want to spoil that. But I want to say to you, your wife, your son, everyone out there, Happy New Year, and appreciate you coming on. And you had a great year this year. I mean, 52 weeks of amazing content. And
I took 1 week off, so 51 weeks.
All right, well, you could have just gone with it. But Dan, thanks so much for joining us on the program, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the network tomorrow.
I'll see you on TV in a little bit.
Thanks. Bye. Welcome back, and now we're going to shift gears a little bit. And we just had the passage of the Secure Act, a lot of things going on in the retirement space, and I couldn't think of a better way than to look at some of the nuts and bolts, some of the analytical data around retirement plans. And joining me on the line, Stacy Sandler. She is a principal with Deloitte Consulting, where she leads the retirement and wealth consulting practice. Stacy, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's great to have you. And I'm a big fan of this survey. And just for the benefit of the audience, because our audience is really diverse, we've got consultants, advisors, regulators, legislators, but also just Americans just trying to learn as much as they can. Can you just delve into the nuts and bolts, the logistics around what this survey is? I know it really well, and I really respect the work you all do.
Oh, thank you so much. Sure, I would love to. So this survey actually goes out and surveys directly to plan sponsors of 401k and 403b plans. This is our 16th year hosting the survey, and we do it biannually. We had found doing it every year there wasn't a whole lot of change. So this is our 16th year. We have about 240 plan sponsors that responded to the survey.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And then for those who are listening, it's not always easy to look, and we'll post a link to the page that hosts Stacy and the team's information. But Stacy, it's not always easy pulling information from all different sources. I mean, you can look at the 5500s, but you can't get the kind of data that we're talking about here. Would you mind just sharing, and then we'll get into the analysis, what you actually found. But would you mind just sharing some of the things that you try to capture as you're crafting this survey?
Yeah, of course. Our title this year is The Retirement Landscape Has Changed, and Are Plan Sponsors Ready? We asked a number of questions about the nature of their business, what industry are they in, how are they owned, the size of their business, and then we get into key trends. So what are they doing within their plan design? Do they have step-ups? Do they have auto-enroll? What are their key focuses? Why do they may or may not leave their providers? So we try to get everything from A to Z so that not only can we understand what's on the mind of the plan sponsors, where their key focuses are, but also how are their providers serving them.
And I can imagine that there's a pretty large team that has to crunch through the numbers and do this data. It's I mean, you're very capable, but I'm sure it's not just you. It's got to be a whole group of people. So just would you mind just talking a little bit about the team and about who works on this?
Oh, yeah. To be honest with you, it is less me and more of the team. So we have some very key practitioners within Deloitte Consulting that either work directly with plan sponsors or with providers. Many of them have been leading this survey for a number of years. And then we have a whole bunch of our analytical team that looks at the data year over year. And then, of course, we have our marketing team and our sort of communications team to make sure that we're articulating it in a way that the audience, whether, as you said, plan sponsor, providers, or consultants, or even advisors are interested. So It is quite an impressive team.
Yeah, it does take a village. This is a lot of information to kind of go through. So with that being said, Stacy, would you mind just and I should just point out this was all collected prior to the passage of the Secure Act, and we still don't know it's going to take a lot of time to implement those changes. But Stacy, would you mind what are some of the high-level trends and things that you're seeing in this analysis and what you've gotten back from plan sponsors and employers?
Yeah, of course. The biggest item or key theme that we would point out is the normal retirement model of working to age 65 has changed as more individuals working into retirement, leading to way more needs, whether it's personalized or diverse. And we see that for, three sort of key reasons. One is that the retirement age is moving. People are healthier. So they believe they can work. Two is that there's an alternative workforce out there that's giving them more opportunities, whether it's part-time, whether it's contract work, or, the gig economy. And then they need to pay for things like healthcare. And what they're finding is that they have a lack of retirement savings. So there's a need for them to continue to work, and their health and their age is not a barrier any longer.
Yeah, that's what I just sense in talking to people and doing many interviews. People, especially more mature workers, want to work. I mean, there's no sense in just kind of fading off and sitting in the rocking chair watching soap opera or whatever. Just whatever. People want to be contributing, and they want to be part of the workforce. And what we've actually this past week, I had a great interview with Carrie Hannon, who's a columnist for the New York Times. She's an author, and she talked about the workforces of tomorrow will be intergenerational. So we'll have boomers, we'll have Gen Xers, of which I'm a part of, Gen Y, millennials, and Gen Z, and that'll be amazing. And a lot of people want to work, a lot of younger people, a lot of more mature people want to work with different generations. And I would imagine that would be kind of reflected in what you're talking about, and also in some of the data.
Yeah, most definitely. And that becomes the challenge for plan sponsors, is now they need to look at their plan very, very differently. And they need to consider not only what their plan design is, but how to best communicate. They're more focused on outcomes for their participants. And quite honestly, they want to be served as well. From a plan sponsor perspective, they want more tools. They want to be able to manipulate data so that they can see the effectiveness of their plan and how their participants are ready to retire.
Yeah, and
it's interesting because...
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go, please continue your thought.
Don't worry. My thought there is when you look at the data, only 18% of plan sponsors say they're ready, that their participants, that they believe their participants are ready to retire. Yeah. 18%.
That's scary.
47%. I know, and 47% believe that the lack of retirement readiness is really, concern around their financial wellness. So it is a concern, and I give a lot of kudos to plan sponsors because they have to sort of pivot and change as their workforce changes.
Yeah, it's not easy to design, and I'm sure that you and the team at Deloitte, among other consulting firms, I mean, you have to, if you're not generally just not consulting in the retirement space, you've got all these voluntary benefits, healthcare, and they all have to fit together. And I think one of the challenges or things that we've had in the retirement industry is that we've only a lot of times just focused on the retirement plan, but they all have to work, all these benefits have to work together to retain the workforce, but also incentivize people to come work for you. And therefore, it's important to understand what your benefits are in terms of retirement. Are you replacing this percentage of income? Are you, supporting this type of outcome for participants?
You are spot on. And I would say that, we have a couple of issues. One, we continually call it saving for retirement. We might have to change that nomenclature given we have the younger workforce that isn't necessarily interested in saving for retirement. They're mostly interested in saving, so I think our industry needs to think about that. And number two, when you look at most of these websites, they're only showing one purview into, what they're saving within their 401k plan. And only 39% are showing outside participant accounts or, deferred comp plans at 31%, and HSAs is only at 16%. So until these tools become more effective and more integrated, that full financial picture is hard to see.
Yeah, but it's nice to see the shift. At least people are acknowledging that, and I think you gave kudos to the plan sponsors, to the employers who sponsor these plans. It's nice to see the shift in thinking, because when I was a consultant, that the things that you go into a quarterly meeting with a client, and they're really concerned about the investment performance. Or what I wanted to also ask you about, with all these rash of fee litigation that's going on in both the 403 and the 401k, have you seen a change in the fees associated? I know part of the report that I remember reviewing, your analysis included weighted average expense ratio and things like that. Have you seen that continue to drop? Or has that kind of flatlined? I mean, have we gone any to the point where record keepers are now paying the employers to record keep their plan? We're now in negative space.
Oh God, we could spend an hour on this topic. Let me just leave you with this.
Yeah.
In that, to answer the question, I think plan sponsors have a very interesting fiduciary balancing act, right?
Yep.
So they need to make sure that their plans and their fees are appropriate for their participants. And in fact, 48% of their plans have a 0.5% increased default rate. So they're increasing their default rate to 5%. That's up from 37%. There's also a shift in average weighted expense ratio, which is at 0.5%, which is, I think it's 75% this time around, and it was at 40%. So they are paying very close attention, not only into the shift into the average weighted expense ratio, but the plan design where they're increasing the default. In addition, though, what that causes is if they're taking away the fees from the funds, they do have to increase the per participant cost.
Yeah.
So that has gone up. I think it went up from 50 to 55, something like that. Mm-hmm. So anyway, the point is they are looking at it from every different angle. And then of course, you have transparency, right? So they have to make sure it's all transparent. So then when the participant make choices in their plans, that they know the fees that are associated with it.
Yeah, it's a lot. There's a lot that's on the shoulders of these plan sponsors. Stacey, I know that the survey was done before the Secure Act, but since we're talking on a day that the president was to sign the appropriations bill into law, any reflections that you may have about the Secure Act and how that could potentially, some of those provisions might be able to tie into some of the data points that you picked up in the survey?
Yeah, I have two comments. One is, yes, given what I said, that there are going to be more people working into retirement, and now maybe a whole new flux of people who are part-time. This is going to be an interesting administrative and communication strategy issue, both from the plan sponsor and the provider. I haven't spent a whole lot of time talking to our clients, both providers and employers, about it, but I can tell you my gut is that they may not be ready, and there could be a lot of things that they're going to have to shift their attention to if this actually does become something they have to work on. So I don't know what their readiness is, but my fear is that they're going to have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I think I would think you're right. And just in talking to people that I know, and employers, and just regular average Americans who are in these plans, I mean, there's a lot to think about. You've got the repeal of the stretch IRA that has impacts on financial planning, but then open MEPs, a lot of that stuff doesn't become effective, for a couple of years. There's a lot of things, and I lived through EGTRA, the Economic Growth Tax and Reconciliation Relief Act. I just want to get it out there in case anyone doubted that I knew the acronym and can remember it, but it came out in 2001. Those were very sweeping changes. That took a lot of time. We had like a year plus to ramp up. I think it became effective January 1st of 2002, passed in 2001. I could be wrong on some of those dates, but there were a lot of provisions that required record keepers, everyone, and employers to adopt new provisions. I think you're right on that. I think that there's a lot to think through, what you're going to have to do. Are you going to sponsor an open MEP if you're a small business, and whether or not you're going to offer a 401k now that you potentially could do that? What does that entail? I agree with you. I think there's a lot of things for people to think about. I think it's going to keep consultants and attorneys very, very busy in the coming years.
Yep, I agree.
Well, Stacey, I just want to say thank you very much for sharing just a small smattering of the data. And again, for the benefit of the audience, I will post a link to the website where you can find some of the data that Stacey's talking about. Really appreciate all the work that you and the Deloitte team do. It's absolutely amazing, really important. I know when I was a consultant working with employers and plan sponsors to benchmark plans, very helpful to kind of know how you compare. And at the end of the day, that's all you can do is kind of compare yourself to like organizations or people with the same employee base and asset base. So really appreciate the work you guys do. And thanks so much for coming on the program today.
Yeah, and I would like to thank you as well. And I do read your daily newsletter and updates, and I want to thank you for all of what you share with us, because I look at it on a daily basis.
Oh.
So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. You're too kind.
Happy holidays.
Yep, thanks. Well, that was great. Guys, that was great. So this will air next Sunday, so a week from, it'll be the 29th. And I will share, Melissa, I will share with you and Stacy the link. And I also am going to send you a graphic as when we get off the phone of who is included on the podcast every week, just so you can see the brands and their brand share the podcast as well. So feel free to share, not share. It's up to you. No requirement there, but we appreciate you spending some time with us.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, and maybe we'll we'll cross paths another time.
Absolutely. Take care. Have a great holiday.
You too.
Bye-bye, all.
Bye.
1, 2, 2, bring it to the phone. Snoop Doggy Dogg and Dr. Dre is at the door, ready to make an entrance. So
welcome back. Now time to talk real estate. And joining me now from Market Watch, he is the real estate reporter there, Mr. Jacob Passy. Hi, Jacob. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. How was your holiday season so far?
It's been good. Relaxing, I should say. But the weather's not as bad as I thought it would be. But
yeah,
I'm happy. I'll be happy when it's over too, though. It's nice to have it, but then the rush and the less amount of time, that's always a challenge.
Totally.
So I know you had a little bit of an interruption this week in terms of the holiday, but what's going on in terms of real estate this week?
Yeah, so I did a story earlier this week looking at a study that was done by researchers at the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard, looking at where across the country has the most stringent zoning regulations. So I think you and I have talked about this before, but zoning is a kind of a hot button issue in the real estate world. There are lots of researchers who argue that, the situation we're in right now with, housing becoming so unaffordable is a reflection of the fact that, many parts of the country make it very difficult to build new homes. And that's led, or, they have a lot of requirements for what you can build if you do build a new home. And that's, a lot of people say that's what's led us to the situation where there's, low supply of homes on the market for home buyers especially, but also for renters in some parts of the country. That's, what's sending prices higher. So these researchers, examined the local zoning laws. They did a survey of, different metropolitan areas across the country, and they compared it with data that was collected back in 2006, so kind of capturing, a decade plus in change here. So, the cities that ranked highly are not super surprising. The city that ranked highest on this index, which means that it had the most stringent or onerous zoning regulation, was the San Francisco metropolitan area. And then number 2 was New York City. So, right there you can kind of see, those are 2 of the most expensive real estate markets in the country. Areas that are, becoming famous for how unaffordable they are and how people are leaving them as a result. Other cities on the list included Seattle, Los Angeles. So the places you think of when you think of, increasingly unaffordable housing, ranked pretty highly. But one thing that I also found interesting was they looked at, the types of regulation and, looked kind of at the broader national trends that are going on. And, they basically, I quoted them as, writing that there is no place on average where residential development is simple and quick. So, this is a problem, it's not just a problem in these, major metropolitan areas. This is indicative of, housing markets across the country. Local lawmakers have made it more and more difficult, and there's probably, good reason to have some regulation in place. You want to make sure that, homes are safe to live in, things like that. But they found that it takes on average almost 3.5 months for a developer to submit a project and receive a decision from local authorities. And in the more highly regulated parts of the country, it can take over 8 months on average. So,
Wow.
that's a long span of time just to get approval. That's not even including, the building and all that, that's, or developing the land. That's just, submitting a plan and getting a decision. The researchers also, went into, different types of, regulation, what's becoming more common, less common. So, one thing that's, become almost omnipresent, the researchers wrote, was restrictions meant to limit how densely populated a community is. So, in many parts of the country, or almost every part of the country, there are rules on, how much, basically like, the size of yard, things like that, how many homes can be, how closely homes can be located next to each other. And I'm sure there's, an extent to which local folks are doing that to ensure that homeowners have nice yards, and there's all the benefits there. But when you're basically saying you can't build homes super close together, what you're in effect saying is, too many. You're basically limiting the number of people who can move into an area, and that's what leads us to the situation we're in now.
And Jacob, that has an impact on the economy, the local economy. And to your point, I mean, I can think of many regulations that probably are very important in terms of having the right easements and having drainage, and those are things that don't negatively impact the environment. And I wonder, do you think that and I'll let you get back to the research, but I'm wondering if in the research there's this balancing act that has to happen where you've got to be aware of the environment, you've got to make sure you manage that, but at some point, if you don't have housing where people are going to live, you're going to drive people out of that area, they're going to move to another location that would benefit that economy. So I got to imagine that from a research point of view, that's something that they think has to be managed.
Yeah, no, and it's I feel like the balancing act also comes into play with and this is something I've spoken with researchers, other researchers and economists about is the challenge for local lawmakers is there's not really much incentive for them to, reduce regulation and allow more construction to happen, because what that does in effect is is more, new homes come onto the market that will, could adversely affect the price of, existing homes in the market. If you're trying to sell a 5-bedroom home and a whole new community of 5-bedroom homes opens up next to you, your home probably won't be priced as well. And so that's part of the challenge. That's part of the reason you see, kind of the NIMBY movement, the not in my backyard movement. This especially comes into play, what's really needed in a lot of parts of the country is, very, dense housing, multifamily housing, duplexes, triplexes. You need housing that can, not just, the single family home with the, white picket fence and the large backyard. You need, housing that can, house multiple families. But, people don't necessarily want to be down the block from a big apartment building. So that limits things. And so what most researchers argue is that this is something that needs to be addressed at the federal level. Local lawmakers aren't, they're, especially if they're being voted into office by, homeowners, aren't going to necessarily want to do something that's going to make homeowners angry. But, there's a little bit of a cushion for federal lawmakers. They can do things kind of more en masse and ensure that, some of these changes go into effect. And you're seeing, it's a weird situation. I think you and I have talked about this before from the political side. On the one hand, when I've watched, hearings about housing finance reform and things like that, you see kind of this broad agreement across, Democrats and Republicans that, some regulation needs to be rolled back and, we need to be encouraging home building and things like that. Then the flip side is, nothing really happens, because, the last thing you want to do is, upset the housing market and cause a bunch of people to go into foreclosure and, have a repeat of, what happened before the last recession. So, and historically, when politicians have gotten involved in the housing market, it's not necessarily ended well. So
that's an understatement, Jacob.
Yeah. So, but they're definitely when you look at these studies. And there was another interesting study that I didn't end up writing about that came out this week that I encourage everyone to check out. I think the researcher who led the study did like an op-ed in the San Francisco Chronicle, but he basically studied, the home building in Paris, France, and he, studied how, basically they have managed to, double the amount of housing in Paris. In this, they've built, basically in just Paris alone, they've built, the same number of homes. I think it was like over the last decade or so. I can't remember the exact time frame. In Paris alone, that were built across the entire state of California. And so he kind of, he went into, his name was Yona Freemark, and he went into, kind of why Paris, managed to do this, and it's kind of an important lesson for American politicians and voters, to look at what's happening overseas, and why is it that this metro area that oh yeah, here it was Paris metro area built more homes in the last year than in the entire state of California, despite the fact that it has a third of the population of California. So, interesting stuff there, and I encourage everyone to check it out.
Do they not in Paris have the same environmental or zoning restrictions that maybe those in California might have, or we have in the U.S.? Is that what he was driving at?
It's a combination of factors. There, the biggest answer is subsidies. Paris made a concerted effort to provide subsidies. They created new funding for affordable housing development. They also the government officials basically worked to identify plots of land that were not being used as well as they could be. So he pointed out that researchers in France identified parking lots and closed factories and abandoned government buildings, all these like plots of land that weren't being used, or at least weren't being used to the best of their ability, as areas that could be rezoned for housing. And they also they did develop new zoning rules that prohibited cities in France. They developed new zoning rules that prohibited cities from restricting development based on square footage. So they they basically made it such that a lot of communities required a minimum square footage for new housing, but that prohibits apartments, things like that.
Right.
And so that that allowed some neighborhoods to become much more densely populated and developed, which led to new homes being available to folks.
Yeah, it just sounds like maybe that the regulations need to be updated, and it sounds like this is something that just needs to be revisited from time to time, like in other industries. We our show's about retirement and saving and finance, and those I would argue that those rules need to be updated as well, and have been updated. And it seems like what the researchers are advocating for is, okay, these though necessary, these regulations need to be updated, because without updating them, you're not going to have enough homes, and you're going to have other economic and financial implications that you probably don't even know you're going to have until they're upon you.
Yeah, and this isn't, and I feel like, like this, like I was mentioning with the study, top cities were, San Francisco, New York, in terms of stringent regulation, but these issues are across the country. Especially the supply of housing. Most housing markets across the country are seeing a low supply of housing. It's not just along the coast, and that's in part because as we've talked about before, the kind of more internal cities, smaller cities in the center of the country are becoming more and more popular as people flee the high cost housing on the coasts, and so soon cities like Boise, Idaho are going to have the same problems as San Francisco. And then what do you do? So
I think you bring up a good point, and it's something that's probably underappreciated unless you're a homeowner, or unless someone looking at buying a home, or you're looking at renting. I mean, everyone's got to live somewhere, even though we do have a significant homeless issue in parts of the country. But I think you're right. Jacob, always a pleasure chatting with you and learning about the latest real estate trends. Really appreciate you coming on the show. Want to wish you and your family a very happy New Year, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
Talk soon. Take care.
Thanks, bud. Bye.
Bye.
Bring it to the foe. Snoop Doggy Dogg and Dr. Dre is at the door. Ready to make an entrance. So
Welcome back. We're going to shift gears, talk a little about retirement, which our show is about. But who better to give us an update on retirement than Ms. Alessandra Melito? She is the retirement reporter for MarketWatch. Hi, Allie. Happy holidays to you.
Hi, happy holidays.
Good to talk with you. Thanks for making some time. I know it's tough this time of year. Hope you had a great, wonderful Christmas and great holiday, and I hope you're looking forward to a wonderful New Year. But what's top of mind for you and the folks at MarketWatch this week?
So with the new year comes the new rule officially for the Secure Act.
Yep.
And I had written a story yesterday about just how the Secure Act will affect inherited IRAs. Apparently many people are very curious to see how this will affect them and their inherited IRAs and 401k plans and all that stuff. So basically, as I think we talked about last year, not last year, sorry, still 2019, as we talked about last week.
We're getting close. We're getting close now.
We are close. I'm preparing myself. And see, I'm already there. When we were talking last week, we talked about the Secure Act overall and how it affects people. One of the rules is that people who inherit 401k plans or IRA money, they will have to withdraw their money within 10 years as opposed to over their life expectancy if they're not a spouse. So that is good in the sense that there are no required minimum distributions within those 10 years. So, if you are in your peak earning years or say you're about to retire, you can plan accordingly for your, taxes and income and all that stuff. But I was speaking to some experts who said that this could actually also cause a little bit of a disaster. So if you get say you are inheriting an IRA through a trust, if it's a specific type of trust like a conduit trust or a pass-through trust, you might actually be locked out of your money for 10 years. So people use these particular types of trusts when they are giving money to a young adult or somebody who wastes money or spends a lot of money very quickly. They will use the trust as a protection, and they'll specifically say in the document language that the beneficiary can only receive the required minimum distribution, which under the previous rules, that was fine because they were only going to get that anyway. It's not like they could take any more, any less, whatever. But if the document says that and the person dies in 2020, the beneficiary doesn't have any required minimum distributions to take because under the new rules, there are none for those 10 years. The only technical required minimum distribution would be after the 10th year when the money has to be completely drained out of the account, which means that if you are a beneficiary of an account like this, through a trust like this, you are locked out of your money for 10 years. You go to the trust company and you say, okay, I want to start taking the distributions, and they say, sorry, come back to us in 10 years. So that's a little bit of a disaster.
Yeah, it sounds. Well, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just saying it does sound like it potentially could be a disaster. And my understanding, or at least my thinking, is that probably this is not just for the richest of the rich. There are many types of people that use these types of accounts or these types of trusts, and it would behoove them to make sure that they understand all these implications. Is where I was going.
Basically, people, if you are the beneficiary of an account like this, you should go talk to, first of all, the person that you are getting this money from, if they're still alive, but also financial advisors, the company that is handling a trust or the assets, just because you want to make sure this language changes immediately so that you aren't locked out of your money. And of course, this is in some cases, a lot of people they're going to be inheriting IRA money or 401k money outside of a trust. So it's not like everybody's going to be locked out of their money for 10 years, but they have their own implications. So if you have, if you're going to get this money and you're in your peak earning years, you're going to be paying more in taxes. This particular provision under the Secure Act, just the the elimination of the stretch IRA for non-spousal beneficiaries, that alone will generate about $15.7 billion in tax revenue over the next decade. So the government definitely, they planned accordingly when they created this rule.
Of course.
And I mean, it's not like they're just taking. They are doing other things that can help, and this is supposed to offset some of the costs of other things, like expanding access to 401k plans for small businesses and increasing the RMD age from 70.5 to 72. So there is a give and take, but this particular provision alone is going to make up most of whatever they're spending elsewhere. So that means that if you are the beneficiary or you expect to be the beneficiary, you should plan accordingly. You don't necessarily want to take a big chunk of the money while you are, in the peak of your earning years. At the same time, if you are planning to retire within 5 years, say somebody unfortunately passes away, they leave you an IRA, you plan to retire in 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, whatever, maybe try to take that money after you retire, according to one financial advisor, just so that you aren't, bulking your actual salary with money that's being taken out of this account, which will be taxed at ordinary income. So there's going to be a lot of new planning strategies. I spoke to a lot of people emailed me after that story ran, and they were like, "What does this affect me if I'm already taking money out?" The answer is no. This rule only takes effect on January 1st, which means that if somebody passes away by December 31st, 2019, you will be kind of grandfathered into the inherited IRA rules from before. But if somebody passes away January 1st, 2020 and on, you will be affected and you will start having to drain the account within 10 years. And there are exceptions. Spouses, spousal beneficiaries do not have to worry about this, and disabled beneficiaries don't have to worry about this. Minor children are also exempt, but only until they reach majority age. So if you're an 8-year-old, you don't have to take all the money out within 10 years, but once you say you're in a state where majority age is 21, when you hit 21, you have to start taking those distributions, and you have 10 years to do that. So by your 31st birthday, you will have to drain the account. And let's see, I'm trying to think of anything else.
Well,
is important.
While you're thinking, I was going to ask you, it just sounds like, at the end of the year, you're supposed to look at your beneficiaries, make sure your beneficiaries in file, make sure your asset allocation, what you're allocating money to is still in line with what you need and want for your future. But with any new tax laws, and this is the second year in a row, right? Didn't we have a new tax reform in effective 2018? I think we did.
Yeah.
And so this is the second year in a row when you really, as an adult person, needs to be aware of how all these changes are going to impact you. So now is the time to do that, not a year from now, because you could really find yourself in hot water and not be in a good spot. Is what I'm thinking. I'm hearing you say. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but.
Absolutely. I mean, you should definitely be reviewing all of these different things with a financial professional, especially if you are expecting for big life changes to happen, whether that's, a happy thing like a marriage or a sad thing like a death. Unfortunately, some people are reaching out to me and they're like, I do expect so-and-so to pass soon, and I'm just wondering what we should be doing now. It's obviously not something that you want to necessarily be thinking about when you're going through those types of life events, but it's important to start prepping and planning ahead so that you aren't hit with major tax consequences. I mean, but you're right, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that was technically, I think it was November, December 2017, and then people had 2018 and 2019 to figure out, and now with the retirement savers, they have to figure out what to do now in 2020. And there's a learning curve literally every year. So
and it looks like just in conversations that I've had, but there could be either additional saving or additional changes that happen, additional legislation that happens in 2020, even though it is an election year. And so it seems like this is part of the normal course of business that's going to be happening at least in the next few years. And so people really need to be on top of their game. And that means, you don't necessarily, as an individual, have to be on your game, but you can reach out to somebody who is a professional to help you through it, or someone who has helped you in the past through it. And whether it's an attorney, whether it's a financial advisor, whether it's a combination of both, now's the time to do that, because you do not want to be caught without knowing all the facts and how that's going to impact with your financial plans.
Yeah, absolutely.
Allie, always a pleasure chatting with you, and great to have you as a contributor on our show. This is our last show for the year, but we'll be right back at it again right after the new year. So thanks so much, and wishing you and your family a very lovely new year, and we will talk with you soon.
All right. You too. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
1, 1, 2, 2, bring it to the 4. Snoop Doggy Dogg and Dr. Dre is at the door, ready to make an entrance. So back on this.
Welcome back. Now we're going to shift gears, talk a little about retirement and what's going on the Hill, and take a look backwards. I think they want to do this week. And joining me now, they are in remote locations today. The Legal Eagles, David Levine, Kevin Walsh, both principals with Groom Law Group, an employee benefits law firm based in Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, Happy New Year to both of you.
Happy New Year, and thanks for having us on. You know, with the holidays, we feel like it's a good time to look back and see what echoed throughout the past year.
I totally agree. And David, let's start with you. What's top of mind for you as we look back on 2019?
As we look back at 2019, I think there's a couple themes, Jeff. And I think echo is a great world, because I think in D.C. we're all accused of living in an echo chamber. At least Kevin and I are, so we can start with that. Obviously, we had the permanent echo of Secure that finally petered out at the end of the year with some positive outcome. Plus,
Petered out?
Well, yeah, but, you know, it's part of our 2020.
Past. I mean, I feel like that's not petering out. That's kind of a big deal. Peter out, like went out with a whimper. This went out with a bang.
It went out with a bang, but that's our 2020 segment, not our 2019 segment, Kevin. We could talk about regulatory initiatives like e-delivery. I think that's a very big one. And I think another big thing to talk about that came out of 2019, the never-ending trail of litigation, but the fact that the Supreme Court's looking at it, and there have been some wins for the defense. That's my takeaways. Kevin's probably going to have so much more lofty and like intellectual themes to add to that. What do you think, Kevin?
So I'm not even really thematic, but I think one theme in 2019, and just one thing that's echoed from 2015 to the present, has been this need for guidance. And we've seen it in a couple areas where, you know, in 2019, the White House issued some executive orders saying, you know, don't bring enforcement without providing regulatory guidance. You know, go through notice and comment. Give the regulator community an opportunity before you enforce to know
Kevin,
what the rules are.
Kevin, I got to jump in. I feel a missing participant theme coming on. Go ahead.
And I think one area where I think we're hoping that 2019, where we didn't see the change we expected, was with missing participants. I think the enforcement initiative from 2015 continued. But kind of there were other big positive bright spots in 2019. When we think about kind of the rise of coverage, so allowing small employers to band together to offer plans. And we saw that first through an association retirement plan rule that was finalized this year, and again in the Secure Act. So to me, kind of the big story of 2019 is kind of this initiative towards coverage, to get coverage for smaller employers that traditionally haven't offered plans.
And Kevin, I'm going to add one piece to that. I think a sleeper item as part of this is the continued movement forward of the state plans. And that'll be a 2020 topic, of course. But in 19, you have
Isn't that next week's episode?
It is next week's. But in 19, you did have litigation over the California program that is still ongoing, and California is still moving forward. We have a number of states going forward. And there was a lot of germination, especially with Chairman Neal and House Ways and Means, about different ideas about expanding coverage, some of which came to fruition. I like your association retirement plan and MEPS, but I also think there's a lot more that was proposed, and we'll have to see what comes up, and we'll talk about that next week. But what else do you want to talk about, Kevin?
I mean, I think we've done a pretty good coverage of what happened in 2019, and I think with that, you know, I'd like to say I hope everyone's enjoying their holiday season, and let them get back to their week a little sooner.
Yeah. Hey guys, I want to say I think you guys did an amazing job this year in terms of providing coverage on these very important topics, breaking it down for the audience. You know, we have a very diverse audience, and I think you guys did an amazing job. How would you grade out compared to 2018 or 2017, how would you grade out this year in terms of what we got in terms of retirement?
Well, in terms of coverage, since we talk our theme du jour is coverage. I think 19 was a great leap forward with the passage of the Secure Act, but I also think it wasn't as fulsome as I would have hoped. Kevin and I make our jokes about missing participants. E-delivery was a great leap forward, but there's a lot of other topics out there that people are looking for. There's a lot. I think people are really trying to find the way forward, especially in an era of fee compression and margin compression and consolidation. I think that people are still trying to find where is the next way forward. But Kevin, you probably have a different thought.
Yeah, I think 2019 was a big year for some aspects of administrative simplification and for getting kind of coverage to smaller employers. On the other hand, I think there's a number of initiatives that are still kind of ongoing. So David mentioned e-delivery. That's probably going to be finalized next year. We didn't talk about standards of care. That's likely to continue into next year. The Secure Act passed at the very end of the year, but implementation is going to be in 2020. 2019 to me was a big year, but the real action is going to be in 2020.
Yeah, agreed. Well, I just want to say that you guys were amazing in terms of breaking it down each and every week. I mean, you look back, 52 episodes of this show. Every Sunday this comes out. And you guys were right on top of it. So on behalf of the audience, I just want to say thank you. And looking forward to hearing your prognostication or your thoughts around, maybe not prognostication, but your thoughts around 2020.
Oh, thanks, Jeff. It's always good to be on the show.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks,
we
guys.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right. Take care.
Well, folks, that's a wrap. The end of our shows for the year. Hope you enjoyed it. I know I do. I love talking with our contributors, special guests, about all these very important issues, analyzing it, breaking it down so that people have the information they need to be financially independent. So tune in again next week, and that'll be next year. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.